Hello and welcome to PCB Chat, where we talk with experts across the printed circuit design, manufacturing, and electronic supply chain fields. I'm Mike Buteau, president of the Printed Circuit Engineering Association. My guests today are Wally Rhines and Merlyn Brunken. Regular listeners will know that Wally's been joining us on PCB Chat since we launched the program back in 2018. He spent more than 45 years in semiconductor and PCB design as an executive with Mentor Graphics, and before that, TI. Joining Wally is Merlyn Brunken, who is the longtime market intelligence director with Siemens Digital Industries, formerly Mentor.
Today we're discussing the fourth quarter 2021 market numbers from the ESD Alliance. These are for the period ending December 31st, 2021, and were released the week of April 4th, 2022. After a 14.5% increase in revenue in the PCB and MCM design category in the third quarter, I guess we were due for a regression. And sure enough, we had one. We only saw growth of 13.9% for the fourth quarter. Not bad, huh, Wally?
No, that's a terrific quarter, and for PCB, that's great. But I have even better news for the full year, 2021. PCB set an all-time record at 15.1%, so slightly greater than the previous all-time record in 2019.
Just staggering. And it was a broad-based, market improvement again this quarter, correct?
It really was, although the quarter had a couple regions that were down and some categories that weren't quite as strong. Once again, the annual data had growth in every region of the world. And if we get into the categories in PCB, they all looked positive. Fourth quarter, a little bit down in library and data management, really slight, almost flat. And everything else, good growth in the fourth quarter and good growth for the full year.
You know, you mentioned some of the geographical differences. I know the Americas and Europe both set all-time highs for quarterly ECAD revenue. APAC slipped a little bit from its high in the third quarter, but still looked really good.
Yeah, it's very hard to find anything bad around the world. If I want to search on the fourth quarter, we were down in Japan in PCB and down a little in Europe, about 9%. But the North America growth was phenomenal, 53% for the quarter. Worldwide, as you said, 13.9%. And then looking at the full year, just everybody in double digits except Japan, and even Japan was positive.
And for listeners who are interested in the semiconductor side, it looks like that segment was very strong too.
Yeah, the overall EDA had quite a good quarter this time at 14.4%. For the actual number for total EDA is $3.5 billion in the fourth quarter. So that's very close to a $14 billion run rate. And so with a total year over 12 billion. And if we look at the overall categories in the semiconductor industry, it's also pretty hard to find weakness. A little bit slow on physical design and verification, but everything else very strong.
This episode of PCB Chat is brought to you by PCB East, the original conference for the electronics design, fabrication, and assembly industry on the East Coast. Coming to Marlborough, Massachusetts, April 11 to 13th, the trade show features a 3-day technical conference, plus an exhibition on April 12th. Visit pcbeast.com for details.
Have you found any leading indicators in the general economy that would suggest future growth or regression for EDA in general and PCB tools specifically?
No data. Everyone's a little nervous what's going on in China. Maybe also a little in what's going on in the Ukraine, because the Eastern European countries are so critical to the supply chain, particularly for automotive. and people worry what's going to happen to the ability to produce cars without the supply chains operating efficiently. Once again, I would note, as we have in many other calls, that while we have volatility in the actual production of products, we tend to have much less volatility in the design of products. The reason being that design is a long-term activity. You don't stop designing next year's car just because you're having trouble delivering this year's car, and you don't want to get rid of designers who are very hard to hire and who work over a long period of time just because you have a temporary weakness caused by disruptions in the world. Now, the China thing may be more significant over time. Years ago, we had the Panda software was sort of an attempt by China to nationalize its printed circuit board design software. That didn't work. Now we have a much more intense effort in China to get a domestic EDA industry. Phenomenal amount of money pouring in. So I think people in the EDA industry are a little bit uncomfortable with what that might do. But meanwhile, the world is very dependent upon EDA, which largely comes from U.S.-based companies, about 95% of total worldwide revenue.
Yeah, to your point about the auto market and the way that design works outside of the typical demand cycles. I mean, I think we can say the same thing about semiconductors in general. And I think it was Gene Wolfe, maybe, that if you remember that name, he was a TI fellow back in the day. He had told me maybe some 30 years ago that the decisions for when to add capacity were made for semiconductor fabrication were made outside of the normal demand cycles. And I'm not sure that that's changed a whole lot over the past 30 years. Would you agree?
I would have to agree, but it's not necessarily a good thing, because what it meant was when the demand was greatest and the shortages were greatest, the whole industry piled on and made massive investments, thus stimulating the next recession in semiconductors when that capacity came online. We've had some moderation of that in the sense that the most volatile of the commodity products are now supplied by a relatively small number of suppliers, mostly Samsung and SK Hynix and Micron. And so you only have three companies to get out of whack with investment, and that's exactly what you've seen. The big shortages and the just like big oversupplies have not affected memory as badly as they have the shortages in the rest of semiconductors, where we have really critical shortages. And I think what you're seeing is unprecedented, massive investments, announcements of over $100 billion from Taiwan Semiconductor and similar numbers from Intel and others. And so the seeds of excess supply are being sowed, as they always are, just because of what Gene Wolfe told you about 30 years ago.
Now, employment numbers showed another nearly 6% year-over-year increase in staffing, although the sequential increase was just, I think, 0.1%. Does Q4 usually see a slowdown, relatively speaking, in hiring?
That's a level of detail that I'm going to call on my friend Merlyn Brunken to see if he has insights on seasonality of people growth. I would not have thought that there was much seasonality normally. Would you, Merlyn?
I don't think so. I don't think it's a normal seasonal change.
But, Mike, I think the thing that is unique is that the 5.7% increase in staffing is not that unusual. We see it almost every quarter, and we sort of joke among ourselves, eventually everyone in the world is going to work for the EDA industry, because it doesn't seem to matter whether the revenue is up or down. We increase the actual personnel, and now it's logical we should be increasing it because profitability is exceptionally good. All the major publicly reporting EDA companies are reporting double-digit operating income, and I'm sorry, they're reporting operating income of 40%, I guess I'd say, and also reporting double-digit growth year to year. That's been helped along by the large increase in the number of companies that actually do design, and that's across the board. The superscaler kinds of companies, the Google, Facebook, Amazon, Alibaba, those have been big contributors to the industry by starting their own IC design. But the same thing's true of all the systems companies who have upped their game in printed circuit board design, particularly automotive, with the design of new electronics for electronic vehicles and for autonomous drive and other things. So that's inevitably that growth rate has to slow some as everybody gets their tools in place. But as the industry has highlighted, there are a lot of opportunities for growth, especially in system design, and PCB is a prime beneficiary of that system design growth as we see more and more companies doing their own designs, OEMs as well as tier ones in the automotive industry, but all sorts of other kinds of system design for everything from ocular metaverse to the video games companies and others, all sorts of complex printed circuit board as well as integrated circuit design developments.
You know, it is interesting how going back years, the Densos and the Delcos were spun out of their corporate parents. And now those same corporate parents are rebuilding those internal capabilities because the electrical vehicle space and ADAS creates a whole new opportunity, and that's really high level IP for those OEMs.
Yeah. Now you have to ask, is this temporary or is it permanent? I think the reason there were efficiencies in spinning those businesses out was because they had economies of scale, and if they were only designing for a single automotive OEM, the scale was not as great as if they could sell to the whole industry. Now we're coming back where we have sufficient differentiation in design that the OEMs are designing many of their own products. You heard announcements. Ford created a special group thrust to do IC design, General Motors, something similar. And so this kind of thing tends to go up and down. It's strongest in growth when there is an opportunity for differentiation by doing a custom design for something. And I think as you move to a new generation of technology like electronic vehicles or like autonomous drive, there's a competitive sorting period where everyone wants to get out in front of everyone else. And so it makes sense for everyone to do custom designs. Usually over a period of time that stabilizes, a few big suppliers to the total industry get a larger and larger share, and so the amount of custom design slows down. But this was a little different this time, as the shortages scared a lot of automotive companies who had relied upon supply chains that were very dispersed and diverse, and now there is uncertainty about the political security of various countries in the supply chain and a desire to have more things closer to home, larger inventories, and potentially more control over that supply chain through the OEMs themselves.
Well, that's great color, Wally. Thank you for that. Any last words before we close up?
Well, I'm just delighted that we can report such good numbers. My congratulations to all of you in the printed circuit board industry and the EDA industry that supplies them. It appears EDA is providing a lot of value. It's a large and growing business. It's past the $1 billion point a year ago, and looks like there's no stopping it. So it's really a great period to be in our industry.
Well, thank you, Merlyn, and thank you, Wally. I'll talk to you next quarter.
And thanks to our sponsor, PCB East, the original conference for the electronics design, fabrication, and assembly industry on the East Coast, coming April 11 to 13 to Marlborough, Massachusetts. Visit PCBEast.com for more information. For PCB Chat, this is Mike Buteau. Have a nice day.